Hey, what's up? It's me, your favorite artist you're obviously subscribed to, and welcome to the brush tutorial. Now, before we start this video, this brush tutorial only works on Clip Studio Paint because it is the program I use. These brushes are not going to work on Photoshop or Paint Tool SAI. It's only going to apply to Clip Studio Paint. Now, to find these brushes, they're going to be on my Patreon, but they're for free. So you don't have to pay for them. They're just on Patreon for free. And this is because it's the only place I can upload them on. So I'll leave a link to the post in the description below, and you can download them from there for free. So you don't have to worry about paying. It's fine. Secondly, this isn't gonna really go over like specifically how to use the brushes, but how I use the brushes. So I'm not gonna teach you how to use them. I'm just gonna show you how I use them for my art. And so you just get a better idea of how each brush should work and what you should apply them to. So yeah, let's get started. First is the basic brush. You guys already know I love this brush. Now, what makes this brush super special to me? Well, when you sketch something, you know how like when you sketch something with this kind of brush, let's pull one up. When you're sketching with something like this kind of brush, you're kind of focused on how good the lines look. Like you want to make sure like the pen density doesn't look weird in some spots. You want to make sure all the lines are connected, and you want to make sure that the sketch flows nicely, huh? Well, if your sketch looks good, that's great, but if you're gonna do line art over it, then it's not really efficient, is it? You want to when you're drawing art and you want to be efficient, you got to make sure that you're not spending too much stuff on stuff that doesn't matter. And what doesn't matter is making your sketch look good, because it's only supposed to convey shape and give you an idea of how your art is supposed to look like. And that is what my basic brush is for. My basic brush lacks pen pressure and pen density. So what this is really for is being efficient and helping me focus on more shape instead of making sure that my sketch looks good in itself. So as you can see, I drew a cylinder that easy. If I were to draw it with this pen, it kind of looks incomplete, doesn't it? And that's not what we want. We want to, you're focused too much on your sketch looking complete that you tend to forget that it's just a sketch. So I'm going to show you some applications of how I use it. Now, I really love this brush because, once again, it's very efficient. As you can see here, this is the final, why is it showing upward? This is the final sketch, this is the final sketch before I moved on to line art of this character. As you can see, it looks very simple, but it allows me to, get the shape of the character without spending too much time on it, because this sketch didn't really take me that long because I wasn't so focused on making the sketch good. I just wanted to make it look readable so I could do line art on it. As you can see, this is the initial pose that I wanted for my character. And then I drew over that with a base for my character. And then over my base, I drew the body of the character. And then over the body, I drew the line art. So as you can see here, once again, this drawing didn't take me a long time. I did it on stream, so it took me a lot longer because I was talking to people while I was doing it. But if I were to do it by myself, this would not take me as long because I was very efficient. As you can see, it lacks pen density, but I can understand the shape of the chair. And then I can have my character sit on it. I can sketch a very rough draft of the pose. I can sketch my character over the pose. And then I can sketch my character over the pose, or over the base of the, okay, you get it. But yeah, this pen is very useful because, once again, you're not focused on line density, line width. You're not focused on making sure you get it. You're only focused on conveying the shape and form of your character. And that's what makes this brush super good and super efficient to use. And now on to the next brush. Something completely opposite of my basic brush is the line art brush. Now, unlike the basic brush where it's static, no matter how much pressure you put on it, The line art is completely different. Based on how hard you press on it, it's going to create more and more thickness. And that's why I like it. It gives me a lot of control over the thickness of my pen, or my lines. Now, an example is this drawing right here. Now, as you can see, all the middle of the line art is relatively thin, while the outline of it is thick. This gives my line more variety, and my drawing will end up looking more like, how do you call it? This makes my lines look more dynamic and ends up making the drawing as a whole dynamic. So we're gonna add the color here, and I forgot the eyes. And as you can see, look at the head. Without that line thickness, this head would kind of look kind of skinny. But thanks to the thickness of the outer parts and the thinness of the inner parts, it looks very dynamic. And that is why I love this brush. So usually when I'm drawing something, I'll show you an example. I'm lightly going over the sketch. I'm just lightly going over the sketch, making sure all my lines look good. Let me just draw something simple here so I can give you guys an example. Pretend there was a sketch underneath this thing, and here I am doing line art. And after this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over that same drawing, but I'm going to press harder so it can add more thickness and variety to my lines. And as you can see, it's going to give it more, it's going to make it look more dynamic. If you add thickness to the outer, while the inners look more thin. And I'm going to show you more examples of where that happens in my drawing. This also happens in places like the dress where the wrinkles are relatively thin, while like the edges of the dress are relatively thick. Also, I know my hand doesn't have any wrinkles on it. It's because I colored it, but pretend it did, okay? I would have lines where like I would have thin lines in places where the hand wrinkles were, and then the thick lines would be the shape defining features of the hand. So like the outer parts of the hand, and then the inner parts of the wrinkles would be relatively thin. And that makes it more dynamic when you add the color in. And that is why I love this brush, just because in one brush I can make something thin or thick, and it's relatively simple. On to the next brush, rough shading. Now, rough shading is exactly what the name implies. It is how I do shading. Now, the rough part doesn't imply that it's like a sketch kind of shading, like a shading you do kind of just to, you know, play around with the lighting and stuff. The rough part indicates that it is rough. So as you can see, when I'm trying to color the hair, you can see that the colors won't mix very nicely. They don't really blend well with each other. You may be asking why I'm dissing this pen, but I'm going to show you in a second. As you can see, the colors don't really blend nicely with each other. And that is why you need the tool that goes with it, the close blur tool. Now, the close blur is basically a smudging tool. As you can see here, you can smudge the color and it'll go in a direction. Unlike a regular blur tool that would statically just blur from its place of origin, the close blur is going to stretch and smear the color. Now, if you pair up the rough shading with a smudge tool, it's going to blend much nicely with each other. So as you can see, aside from being rough, it goes from rough to soft looking. As you can see, now the shading looks much more softer than it originally did. These two brushes are what I use to shade everything. Well, aside from these other two, what I'll get to that in a second. I like rough shading, close blur. I use it to shade everything. I don't have a specific brush for clothes, a specific brush for hair, a specific brush for shoes. I basically use these brushes in anything I color. So the hair that I previously had, because I erased the shading. Let's see if I can bring it back. I don't think I'll be able to. So this was this was pretty much practice coloring, so it's not going to look as neatly as I just did. So the hair brush, all the hair brushes are the exact same things I use to shade the legs and the clothes and the skirt. So I don't have a separate brush for each object. I use these two brushes. So let's say this clip right here is pulling on the shirt, because it's keeping it together. But we gotta show that it's being pulled by the shirt. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our rough shading. We're gonna add lines that kind of indicate that it's being pulled. But that kind of looks boring, and it doesn't really look like it's being pulled, does it? Well, we're gonna add a little circle on top that goes into the line. And we're gonna take our smudge tool and we're gonna smudge outwards of these circles. And now it looks like, okay, maybe I added too many, but it's fine. Now it looks like it's being pulled by the clip. The shirt is being pulled by the clip. And that simple shape and those smudge allowed us to convey that. Now, I have a lot of these different shapes that indicate a lot of different things. So sometimes it could be a cone with a big thing in the middle, and then I'll smudge outward of that cone. Or it can be a line with the circle on it, and I smudge outward. Based on whatever, I'm gonna do different shapes for different things. So as you can see in the hair, we got a triangle, smudge, triangle, smudge here. Over here we have a cone, and then we smudge outward. And yeah, that technique applies for a lot of this stuff. So I basically use the rough shading and close blur for everything. And next we have the airbrush tool, which is pretty easy to tell you what I use it for. I basically use it to create gradients that give the drawing more form. And that's about it. So I'm going to show you an example. We have a purple ball right here, and let's say we're shading it. Let's say we're shading it. We're gonna do a quick just shade. And let's say the ball doesn't look as dynamic or like as 3D as you want it to be. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make a multiply layer, clip it on there. I'm gonna take this color, and I'm just gonna make a gradient of this color. And that's going to give it more form. As you can see, now it kind of looks more 3D-ish. Yes, it looks like a cheap trick, but it really helps. So as you can see, with this head over here, let's say I want to make it look more dynamic. We're going to put a multiply layer. We're going to take the head, and we're going to do that and fix the opacity. And as you can see, it makes it look more 3D. Now, it doesn't just have to be a multiply layer. You can if you have one shading color, you could just do it on the same layer. Do something like that. Still works. So I just mostly use this airbrush you mostly just want to use airbrush when you're trying to create gradient. Another example, as you can see on these leggings, there's this bluish color over here. And to achieve that effect, I did an airbrush tool to achieve that gradient effect that you see right here, from going to black to light blue. And yeah, that's about it. Lastly, we have the blur brush tool, which I use it's like the brush I use the least amount, but it's still very important. It's very hard to explain what kind of situations you would use this for, so I'm going to give you two examples. Let's say that I have this ball right here, and I need it to look spherical, and I need to put like a soft gradient in the middle, but not on the edges. I can't use an airbrush tool because it doesn't look like that shadow is seamless. Like, I need the shadow to go from hard to soft, but I can't use an airbrush tool because it looks too separate from each other. I'm going to use an airbrush tool, and I'm going to go over the middle, And now as you can see, it looks soft in the middle, but hard on the edges. And that's going to give me a seamless effect of the shadow going from hard to soft. I'm going to do another example so you can understand where I would apply this to. So let's say we have a shadow right here, okay? This is the shadow of the sphere. And you know how when shadows tend to go farther away from the object that's creating them, they tend to get more blurry? Well, we can't use an airbrush tool to convey that because it's not going to look seamless. As you can see, they look like totally different things. We're going to take this blur tool and we're going to go over here to make it look like that shadow is going farther and farther, or to make it look like the shadow is going farther and farther from the object. I'm going to erase this part. So as you can see here, now it looks seamless. It didn't look like before where we would just like plaster an airbrush tool over it. Now it looks like that shadow is becoming more blurry as it goes on. Now, pretty much in simple words, it turns rough shading into airbrush tool seamlessly. That's pretty much like the most simplistic way to put it. So yeah, those are the only 6 brushes I use to create any piece of art. This right here, this was only created using these 6 brushes. You do not need a brush for every single thing. You don't need a brush for clothes. You don't need a separate brush for hair things. I mean, you can do that if you want to, if it makes it easier for you. But if you want to create any kind of art, you don't need that many brushes. Okay, you don't. But if you want to, go ahead. No one's telling you can't. I'm just saying that if you don't like to use a lot of brushes, you don't have to. And yeah. And that's the end of the tutorial. I'm sorry I'm not able to show you detailed ways of how to use each brush. I just wanted to give you a general introduction to the brushes before you use them, and that's kind of the point of this video, just to be a general introduction to the brushes I use. And I hope you can use them effectively based off of this tutorial. And so yeah, that's it. If you want these brushes, once again, they are going to be in my Patreon for free. You don't have to worry, no paying. It's only there so you can check out my Patreon. Also check out my Patreon. So yeah, I'll see you later and have a good day. Thank you.